Let's outline one workout that is absolutely crucial to endurance performance, but that few runners and athletes do. That is sprinting. Yes, sprinting. We're going to break down what sprinting actually is, how to incorporate it into your endurance running or training, why you need to, what it does physiologically, and how to do it safely without getting hurt. So let's go into all of this. Why in the world would an endurance athlete sprint? Well, first off, let's define a sprint. When I'm talking sprint, I am talking all out. So all out in terms of track language, not in terms of podcast or health influencer language. What does that mean? We're talking something less than 100 meters where you reach near max velocity and then recover long enough so that you can do it again without getting fatigued. When we're talking about pure speed training, sprint training, where we're reaching near max velocity, fatigue is the enemy. It gets in the way. If you are getting tired or out of breath, you are not recovering enough and you are going too long on the sprints. The goal is not to get fatigued. You're going to feel tired the next day or maybe sore the next day or the day after. That's a different kind of fatigue. Within it, not trying to get fatigued. Why would a distance runner sprint? If you're running a marathon or a 10K or a half marathon or 5K, why would you sprint? It's so much slower than that. Couple of reasons. So first off, sprinting increases our muscle fiber recruitment pool. So I'm going to simplify here, but think of it like this. We have all these muscle fibers, some of which are more slow twitch orientated, meaning they're better and more efficient at slower, easier paces working aerobically. Some are more fast twitch orientated, meaning they're quick, reactive, they give a lot of power, but they fatigue really quickly. And then we have a lot in between. Okay? In all of our muscles, we have a mixture. Even elite marathoners have some fast twitch orientated muscle fibers. But what we know is we need to essentially use it or lose it when it comes to recruiting the fibers. So there's this, when we talk about recruitment, what we're talking about is the message that goes from the brain all the way down to the muscle that says, hey, activate this fiber, we need it. And what generally happens is we activate or utilize the easier to recruit fibers first. So slow twitch fibers, etc., etc. It's called Henneman's size principle. We don't need to go into it, but that's what we do. The greater the force demand or the greater the output demand, even if there's some fatigue involved, then we start recruiting harder to recruit fibers, more of the mixed in between fast twitch, slow twitch blends, and then the fast twitch oriented fibers. So to really recruit, to increase our recruitment pool is we're saying, hey, we want to be able to activate and utilize all the muscle fibers we have in there. Because if I went out and I did 800 meters at marathon pace, I'm making this up off the top of my head, but maybe I only recruit 40% of my muscle fibers to utilize. If I extend that out and say, hey, I'm going to go all the way at marathon pace, eventually I recruit more than that because some of my muscle fibers, easy to recruit, slow twitch fibers, fatigue, you cycle in through different ones to carry the load as fatigue and energy kind of runs out, etc. So maybe we get up to 70, 80% of the fibers, maybe higher, of the fibers get recruited, right? Even though we're not going that fast because we have to bring them in to handle the load to sustain the force going. But the other way to do this, again, is to give a very high neural demand, saying this is going to require a lot of force, a lot of power into the ground. That's called sprinting. And what we know is if we ingrain or activate or recruit those muscle fibers, it makes it where we can do it again. So if we never send that signal, our brain goes like, I'm never recruiting that fast twitch fiber. So don't make that signal very strong. Or over time, we're going to convert this down to intermediate fiber because we don't use that fast twitch fiber much. So what we want to do is just kind of remind our body, hey, we need to be able to recruit these fibers because that increases our fiber pool so that, as I talked about during the marathon or during the 10K or mile, as our easier to recruit fibers are failing or running out of fuel, we have more to call in to keep that force or power up. Again, I'm simplifying a lot, but that analogy helps you understand what we're looking at from a muscle fiber recruitment. So we need to train our brain and then our muscles to, hey, we need to activate, fire, so we can increase the recruitable size of the pool so that we can call upon them either to run really fast or to pitch in when fatigued or to transport fuel through another mechanism to other fibers so that we can keep going. Okay? So sprinting trains that. Why? It's a high neural demand activity because we're putting a hell of a lot of force into the ground in a very short amount of time. That's it. And it's specific to running because it's running. The other thing that it's really important as is it's the most specific plyometric or strength training activity we can do. Again, recruit a lot of muscle fibers, high power component. You're literally putting all of that force into the ground in about a tenth of a second, because that's how long your foot is on the ground. So it's a strength activity. It's one of the reasons why sprinters look jacked. Even those, not as much, but even those who don't lift weights. They still have, especially legs, larger muscles that are well defined because it's a very specific speed power activity when you sprint. So if you're saying, hey, I don't go to the weight room as much as maybe I should, guess what? You can get some, not all, but some of those benefits literally from sprinting. Okay? So that's number 2. Number 3, from a performance standpoint, what it does is it gives us a bigger speed gap. So think of it like this. If I go down to the track and I can run 100 meters all out in 14 seconds, I'm going to have a really hard time running a 2-minute 800, which is at 15 seconds. Why? Because the gap between my peak speed for 100 meters and the speed I'm trying to sustain is so small that even if I have fantastic endurance, that gap is probably too small. So what I need to do is increase that gap, the differential between my peak speed and my 400, 800 mile, etc. The more room I have, the easier it is to then transition and say, okay, speed is no longer the limiting factor. There's a big enough gap. Now I can work on the endurance or capacity side to be able to lengthen my ability to stay near that speed for longer. We need that gap. All training is playing with the different kinks in the pipes. Am I limited on the speed side? Is there a big enough gap or not? Or am I limited on the endurance side? Can I extend my ability to last at this pace for longer? And as you improve as an athlete, you're shifting the training focus to deal with the different kink in the pipe as your performance shifts and changes. Because we need that gap between our 100 and our 400, our 400 and 800, our 800 and our mile and our 5K, etc. And depending on where that gap is limited, we need to address it. But at the basic gist of it, we need a big enough speed gap between our sprint speed and whatever else we're doing. Okay? Sprinting help increases that gap. Okay. So we understand that. So how do we apply this? So here's how I like to think of it. In endurance running, we traditionally think of we need to build a base. It's correct. Right? We've known this since Paavo Nurmi went on long walks, as I outlined in the history video that I did not too long ago. We've known this since Arthur Lydiard said, hey, go run your 100 miles a week and build your aerobic foundation. Science backs it up. We understand this. Build a base. What we haven't done as well is explain that we also need a base on the other side of the coin. We need a neuromuscular speed base. Why? Because of the things I just outlined. We got to activate the muscle fibers before we can train them or utilize them to help us withstand the fatigue. We've got to build that mechanical or neuromuscular base so that we can move at a fast speed before we become efficient, or it helps us become efficient at slower speeds. So when we look at speed or sprint training, it builds that foundation just like easy running does. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, I've been told high intensity work or speed work is icing on the cake. It is. Sprint training is not high intensity training. What? Because sprint training, if done right, causes a lot of neural fatigue and some muscular fatigue, but it does not cause high acidosis fatigue, which is what we generally think of when we think of doing our high intensity, short, fast work with short rest. Okay, or moderate rest. Sprint training, as I mentioned at the beginning, is about doing something very short with lots of recovery so that fatigue doesn't creep in during the thing. That's it. So it's not high intensity. It's its own separate thing. Okay? Sprint training. When we look at how to implement this, there's a couple of different things we need to do at first before I'm going to explain to you what a sprint training session looks like for an endurance athlete. First is we need to minimize the injury risk, because if you're going sprinting at near max, there's an injury risk. Pulling something, straining something, creating some sort of tendonitis around things because it's a high load. It might not be a high volume, but it's a high demand load on the body. So what does this mean? We need to be prepared before we start sprinting. This looks at a couple different things. First, mechanically. Sprinting is a skill. It's a skill. Swinging a bat, doing other things. It's a skill we need to learn and develop. What that means is we need to work on our running mechanics and form. Now, this isn't the video for running mechanics and form. I promise I'm going to do one soon. I'm working on it. So we'll go over it all in there. But the basic gist is you have to have some general idea of how to sprint. That means what you're trying to do in terms of landing, pushing, extending the hip, relax shoulders, all the stuff that we're going to go through. Okay? To keep it simple here, I'm going to say this, is when we look at sprinting, it should not be the tense up straining. We need to look at how do we go fast as we can, essentially, while staying smooth. Okay? Fast and relaxed, not fast and straining. Again, I'll come back to that in another video on the mechanics. What I will say on this is the way to teach sprinting is to do first submax running, so strides, which we'll get to as well, is a great example. Strides, where we start at maybe mile pace, get a little faster. Long rest, non-fatiguing, get a little faster, holding good mechanics, increasing our arm stroke or our arm swing, okay? Putting a little bit more force in the ground while staying relaxed, and learning how to do it in a submax way to build up to it, okay? It's really important. Strides are a great thing. The other thing from a mechanical standpoint is also from a strength standpoint. Have we prepared the body to be able to sprint? That means, again, using submax where we're getting a little faster, non-fatigue, so we get used to running somewhat fast. It also means strength training. The way I like to look at it is, have we prepared the things that are going to face a lot of load? So this is going to vary for each individual, but you're looking at big movements like lunge matrices, Vern Gambatta's squat matrix, etc., where we're just preparing the body, lower body especially, for like larger movements that give us some sort of capacity all the way from our calf, Achilles through our hamstring to be able to get used to handling some load. And then we transition to what I'd call simple plyometrics, where we get used to, again, being reactive and then handling a load, starting with maybe like jump rope, simple hops, double hops, single leg hops. I don't want to go too into details because it requires a separate YouTube video in itself, but then looking at loading, so some reactive, almost Bosch-like drills where we kind of load the body and get it to absorb the force. But the idea is we need to prepare the body to handle the load. Okay? Strength training and biomechanics. The other thing I'll say on strength training is when we think of running drills like the A skips, B skips, all those are not running form drills. In fact, they probably won't do anything for your running form. In fact, I'll just say they won't. That's what Tom Tellez, coach of Carl Lewis, Leroy Burrell, a bunch of people taught me early in my career. He said running drills aren't form drills. Vern Gambetta, another mentor, said running drills aren't form drills. They are specific strength exercises. And he's right. What are those B skips or A skips? They're trying to prepare you. And in fact, this is what the originator of these drills said. He was in Poland, I believe, training in the winter, and he wanted some way to prepare and train without being able to sprint all out in the cold winter. So he came up with these drills. They're a way to prepare. So those B skips where you're kicking your leg out and kind of pulling back on it, it's training the hamstrings. It's a strength drill. Okay, drills are a great way to prepare for strength. They are not a great way to improve your running form. We'll cover that in our YouTube running video. So there's a little tease. All right, so we've prepped. Then how do we incorporate sprint training for endurance athletes? As I said, you got to start with strides where we're getting progressively faster so that we get used to running somewhat fast. And then let's say we've done all the prep, the mechanics, the strength training. How do we incorporate this? I love incorporating in on hills first. So I pick a moderate hill, again, not so steep, because that shifts it to more of a strength exercise and less where you get that reactivity off the ground. But a moderate or, shallow hill where we're sprinting up it for between 6 and 8 seconds. And then taking several minutes, 90 seconds plus at least for most people, 2 to 3 minutes between. That's a long time. If you want more, take more. 6 to 8 seconds isn't long. The reason is because 6 to 8 seconds gives us time to get almost up to near max in terms of recruitment and force into the ground, but not so much to deplete us. If you look at our phosphocreatine system in terms of energetics, and if you look at fatigue in the muscles, it's not enough to deplete it, especially a distance runner. We recover most of that ability within a couple minutes. That's why we cap it there. That's not going to feel very long. It shouldn't feel very long. Why do we do up a hill? It minimizes injury risk, especially when we look at strains, pulls, hamstrings, things like that. Why? Because you're running up a hill, so that shifts the mechanical load a little bit. Okay. It also makes it where you're not going to reach out with your lower leg because the hill, you're coming out of slant, so your foot tends to hit in a better position and teaches you how to hit in a better position and puts the focus a little more on pushing into the ground, which is what we want when we're looking at training some of these sprint mechanic stuff. So what do? You sprint up a hill. 6 to 8 seconds. Start with maybe 4, extend to 5 to 6. At the high level, maybe you get up to 8 or 10 with longer rest, but most people, I think, around 6 to 8 maybe. And that's fine. And that's the workout. Now, what I do is you got to, again, have a thorough warm-up beforehand. So with distance runners, I often sandwich this with mileage. So maybe a longer warm-up, 3-mile warm-up, do all your warm-up drills and activities and dynamic stretching, then some strides, then get into the hill sprints, and then a longer cool down, 3, 4, 5, 6 miles, whatever, afterwards. I love doing that. Okay, you get a little bit of volume, especially with the longer cool down afterwards, but we're not fatigued going into the hill sprints. Over time, once you've got up to where you can handle, again, maybe 8 by 8 second hill sprints with long rest in between, then, especially for track athletes, we can start converting and shifting those to flat sprints. What do I mean by that? Just get on the track, start shorter. Again, maybe 40-meter excels. We're not going to hit top speed, but 40-meter excels, 50-meter excels, 60-meter excels, somewhere in that range, 60, 80 meters is what we'll kind of top out at, and develop or get used to flat sprinting after we've developed the hill sprints. The reality is that's important for if you're training for the mile or maybe even 5K to do some of that stuff. But if you're looking at the longer distance stuff, you're probably fine with sticking with hill sprints and not doing flat sprints because the injury risk does increase and the benefit probably isn't there to transition over. Now, with our middle distance athletes, at some point we'll probably go from pure speed to extend to speed endurance. This is when we want to use a little bit of that fatigue. So we go from doing 6 by 60 meters on the track to 100 meters or 120s or 150s. Again, with long rest, low volume, but now we're converting, what we are doing is converting that pure speed into speed endurance. So think of it from working on our 100 to working on our 400. You can do the same thing on hills. A lot of times I'll use this initially for hills, is going from 6 by 8 seconds to 6 by 12 seconds, or 6 by 15 seconds, or 4 by 20 seconds. We're working on extending to make that speed go to speed endurance. All right, so we've gone over sprint training, mostly on hills. That's where I'd stay for most people. When and how often? As I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to build the speed base, you should do that neuromuscular base during your base phase. So relatively early in the training cycle. So when you're doing mostly easy, and this is what I love to do for high school and college athletes, but it applies to others, is once we've built our mileage up a little bit, and we've included strides. So it's mileage and strides. We're coming off our break. We built up. We're getting fit, etc. Then I'll go once a week hill sprints, and we'll lengthen it out. And it's basically mileage and hill sprints. Maybe occasionally a steady run in there, but that's when you include this stuff to build that neuromuscular base. Okay? Now, what happens is as we get closer to the season, whether that's cross country, getting ready for 5K or 10K, or getting ready for a half marathon, or whatever your road race you're doing, is what we want to do is then just maintain it. And basically with hill sprints or maintenance of anything, you need to do it maybe once every 3 weeks. Sometimes once every 2 weeks, maybe for a middle distance athlete. But basically once every 3 weeks, take it easy or moderate day, make them be hill sprints, and it'll be good. And this is the advantage here too, is once you adapt to hill sprints, not so much flat sprints, but once you adapt to hill sprints, they often make you feel better a couple days later than neurally fatigued or muscularly fatigued. Why? Because they increase the pop in your legs. So once you've adapted, sometimes you can do this on a Wednesday before a Saturday cross-country meet, and it'll make your legs feel really good. Because what you've done is you've increased the muscle tension, got some pop in there, as long as you're not doing too many, 5, 6, if you're used to doing 8, 10, 5, 6 by 8 second hill sprints, legs feel springy, poppy, you've recruited a lot of fast twitch fibers, feel good, race day comes around, you got some pop in your legs and you're raring to go. That's only once you've adapted. So there you go. That's sprint training for distance runners. Not a lot of recreational, even high school runners sprint. The distance runners sprint as much as they should. I used this stuff when I was competing at a high level. Renato Canova, famous for including hill sprints, all the way back to Arthur Lydiard used sprints as well. And he used hills and hill bounding to prep for those sprints. So long history of doing it at the highest level. Just make sure you're doing it safely. And that's why I think prepare for it. We'll include a video in a couple weeks on running mechanics to help you dial it in and do it smartly, and it will increase your performance and improve your endurance capacity. It also improves efficiency and economy, just in the same way that strength training does. So it has some of the benefits of strength training as well. So until next time, everybody, that is my pitch on sprint training. And here's my pitch, my new book, Win the Inside Game. It's not about sprint training, although it does tell some stories related to it. It's about the mental side of performance and redefining how we look at striving and success that allows us to free us up to perform, not only in our physical pursuits like running, but also in our life and work and meaningful pursuits as well. If you haven't got it yet, there's a pre-order special that if you order this, you get all sorts of bonus items, including one is my 100+ page cheat sheet guide to coaching, the elements of coaching I call it, never before released. I'm not releasing it or selling it. You only get it if you buy this book. So you get 2 books for the price of one. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting. I appreciate all the comments. I'm working on some of the video suggestions you've given me. Again, I'm just here to provide information. We're doing this the low cost, low rent, all truth, all evidence-based stuff from years of experience and knowledge. None of the performative junk that's out there. So I appreciate you supporting the channel and share it with others. So thanks everybody. Until next time, take care.